All right, so we've got those 3 holes there. These 2 are 10 millimeter, 1.5, and that one was as well. But they didn't give us 6 of those bolts. They give us 2 10s and a 7/16 for each side. So what we're gonna do is we drill this out to the 3/8 that they say in the instructions. And then we're gonna take this 7/16 14 tap and we're gonna get it started slowly and then rethread that hole. You go slowly, feel it bind up, just kind of work it back and forth a little bit. Go another little bit, work it back and forth, and then it'll break through the whole thickness here shortly. Now we've got that drilled out and tapped. We're gonna grab our bracket here. And that bracket's gonna bolt up to the bottom here. And remember those, there's gonna be 2 of them that are 10 millimeter hardware. And then that last one is a 7/16. So we're gonna do that to the other side. And then we'll move on to installing the cross member to make sure everything's centered. And then what we're gonna do is weld the front and the back of the bracket, and then maybe like 3 1 or 2 inch wide or 2 inch long welds down the side, just to, because these shouldn't ever need to come off for any reason. Okay, now that we have one side completely tight, this side's still a little loose. So what we're gonna do is hold up the cross member that holds the transmission mount. I know we're gonna be taking this back out to do the transmission, but we're gonna hold it up in here. Make sure all these bolts line up before we tighten the other side and fully weld this thing in. So the reason we're doing this is we want to make sure before we weld everything in place on these side pieces that we're not going to have any issue removing and reinstalling the centerpiece here. All right, our cross member is complete. We're just gonna go in here and put some welds around these brackets. I had to double check over here too, where you've got some hoses and pipes that go across for the like evap system, fuel line, brake line. Make sure that all looks good. And in this case, we are good to go. So this is the new track bar bracket. This is the drop down track bar bracket that converts the single stud of the track bar to a double shear, and then it drops it down a little bit better for some better geometry. Now we reuse these factory fasteners here on the top. Those are the 18 millimeter head. But under here, I don't know if you remember on our very first video, when we took these 2 fasteners out here, they were really rusted in the middle, and we didn't want to reinstall those. So we got 2 new bolts from, I think it was Ace Hardware. That is a M12 1.75 fastener in the grade 10.9. So these here, you can torque them to like 80 foot-pounds, pretty tight. So that bracket's done and finished. And we've got the floor where we're working here nice and clean again. So we're gonna lay on the backs and get this front suspension put together. Next, we're working on assembling these rock link lower arms. You're gonna insert this threaded flex joint into the arm. And if you'll look here, this is how it's gonna sit in the vehicle. So we've got the passenger side arm, the driver's side arm. The adjustment pinch bolts are facing the ground. And then we have to assemble these flex joints. So here's the parts that you get with that. Is going to be 6 bolts, 6 nuts, 2 washers, 2 races, and then the pivot ball. And we will go through assembling that now. All right, first we're gonna take 2 of these bolts and we're going to insert them 180 degrees apart. Then we're gonna slide this race. I think that's a Delrin material, I believe. So you're gonna have this right here, and then we're gonna bring it over here to the housing, and that's gonna be a light press fit. It says you can take a hammer, but I'm able just to push those in all the way with my finger, and you can see right here what that looks like when it's installed. So the next thing we're gonna do is take this, and we want to put a light coat of grease around the ball. So it should look roughly like that, and that will go in the housing. And then we've got another race that we'll place in there. All right, and then now that that's in there, we can put this other backing plate on and then start these nuts on the outside. That's actually going to be the inside of the arm when it's installed. I don't think it matters which direction you do that. I'm just doing both arms to where they match. So now that's on there, that is the little socket for that is going to be a 5/32. So I'm putting that on a really small 1/4 inch driver tool and just gonna suck that in a little bit. And just alternate back and forth a little bit. And then we can put the rest of these bolts in. What's good about this is these nuts on this side here, the flat of the nut will lock into the housing, so you won't have to hold that while you tighten the bolts. And the torque value on these, it says, is 70 inch-pounds, and then go back over them again and make them 85 inch-pounds. But since I don't have an inch-pound torque wrench here, we're just going to run those in by hand and then just slightly wrist tight with a 3/8 ratchet. I'll get these put on here and I'll show you what I'm talking about there. draw that thing down slowly and evenly. Okay, so I just took all of these back out and turned them around. That way the nuts are facing each other when on the vehicle. So I'll show you what I had done. If you look down at the top of these arms, you can orient this joint two different ways. And if you look at that one, you can see that the joint is not in line with the control arm. So when I assembled that, I had that Zerk fitting facing down, and I thought I had those bolts in to where they matched, but I didn't. So now that we've got those on correctly, they should be a mirror image. So bolts on the outside facing in, Zerk fittings are down, and on the bottom here, those pinch bolts are also facing the ground. So we are ready to install these in the vehicle. All right, now that we have those arms in, we've put the longest bolts that are in that hardware pack on the frame side. I'm assuming that's correct because the bracket's thicker up here than the control arm is down there on the lower end. We'll change that if we need to. The third link, or the upper link, in this kit is a little bit different on the flex joint side. So you've got 8 screws, and each side of this housing is threaded with 4 of those. So you're gonna have 4 bolts going in one direction and the other 4 going in the opposite direction. And that's the same torque spec. You're just gonna run those up just wrist tight, which is 70 to 80 inch-pounds. But we'll go ahead and get this third upper link mount put in. All right, you can see here, this is the lower arm that has the nut. And then on the upper one, this bolt goes through here, and that actually has got a threaded nut on the back side of this. So it's kind of tight, and that's where we had to look and make sure we weren't pinching the evap lines or the fuel line or the brake line. So you'll want to make sure that when that bolt comes through this back side that everything's clear and nothing's got contact. We actually had to bend the fuel line down a little bit so that it wouldn't be chafing on anything there. So let's go ahead and get this upper link arm put in. All right, we have the control arms all bolted in, and what I was talking about was earlier, I had this incorrect on one of these arms. So you want to make sure that there's an even gap on both sides of this when the control arm is bolted to the axle down there on the other end. So right here, you can see that gap's even, and we'll scoot over here to the other side. And this one is as well. So basically, when you bolt the control arm to the Jeep on the axle side, you don't want the joint to be resting in that position there. So when that's slid over there to the opposite end, you can see that too. And what would happen is if this joint was turned around 180, that would be an issue. So when these things are relaxed and bolted to the axle, they're both going to be in that neutral position.